The next morning, the valley was quiet after the storm. The air smelled fresh and drops of rain still clung to the grass. The hills around the ranch looked washed clean, and a faint mist drifted along the ridges. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, and the faint sound of cattle echoed from far away. Elias Kane stood by the window, his hand resting on the wooden frame as he looked out across the land. The fight from the night before replayed in his mind. The torch, the rain, the sound of shots. He was tired, but his heart was steady. He had defended his home, and the woman fate had brought back to him. Clara appeared from her room, her hair tied back, her face calm but thoughtful. She carried a folded blanket in her arms, freshly washed and mended. "I didn't sleep much," she said quietly. "Neither did I," Elias admitted. She glanced out the window. "Do you think they'll come again?" He looked at her for a moment before answering. "Maybe, but they'll find nothing easy waiting for them. The sheriff sent word this morning. He's bringing a few deputies to ride the valley for a while. That should keep them off for now." Clara gave a faint smile. "I suppose even trouble gets tired after a storm." They ate breakfast in silence, bread, eggs, and strong coffee. The air between them felt different now. There was no longer only fear. There was something steadier, something built from trust. After the meal, Elias went outside to check the fences. Clara followed, helping him tie loose rails and clear broken branches left by the wind. The land around them shone with sunlight, and birds had returned to the trees. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt peace. Her hands worked easily, her heart not as heavy. The sound of the hammer and the creak of wood were strangely comforting. As they worked, Elias spoke quietly. "You ever think of what you'll do now? Once this all settles?" Clara paused. "I don't know. I lost everything once. I don't want to chase a new life too quickly. I just want to live one day at a time." "That's fair," he said. "You've earned that." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "What about you, Elias? You've lived alone for years. Doesn't it get lonely out here?" He gave a small shrug. "It did. Until now." She smiled faintly and turned back to her work, but her heart beat faster at his words. Later that day, the sheriff rode in with 2 deputies. The horses were tired and splattered with mud. He dismounted and walked up to the porch. "Morning, Kane," he said. "We tracked those riders from last night. Found their camp 10 miles south. Looks like they're heading back across the border. They won't bother you again, at least not soon." Elias nodded. "Good to hear." Clara stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly together. "Were they the same men?" The sheriff looked at her with kind eyes. "Far as we can tell, yes. We found something else too, a paper with your name written on it. Someone had been paid to find you." She swallowed hard. "Paid? Seems like one of those trading gangs put a price on bringing you back. But I sent word to the marshals down south. They'll be waiting if those men try to cross again." Clara's voice trembled slightly. "Thank you, Sheriff." He tipped his hat. "You're safe now, Miss Holt. You've got good folks around you." When the sheriff left, Clara sat on the porch steps, staring out over the open land. The weight she had carried for years began to lift little by little. The men who had hunted her were gone, the fear slowly fading. Elias joined her, sitting beside her quietly. Neither spoke for a while. The wind rustled through the grass and the sky stretched endless and blue. Finally, she turned to him. "I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life for me more than once. You gave me shelter when no one else would." He looked at her, his eyes steady. "You don't owe me thanks. You just needed a chance to start again. I had the space to give it." Clara shook her head. "No, it's more than that. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" he asked. "Belonging," she said softly. For a long time, neither moved. The sun warmed their faces and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the valley. That evening, they sat together by the fire. Elias sharpened his knife and mended an old piece of leather, while Clara stitched a torn sleeve. The cabin glowed with quiet peace. She looked around the small room, the tools by the wall, the shelf with old books, the dried flowers in the vase by the window. "It feels like home here," she said. Elias nodded slowly. "It is home. Always has been. Just needed someone to share it." Her hands paused in mid-stitch. "You really mean that?" He met her gaze. Every word. The next morning, Clara walked down to the creek with a small bundle. Inside it was the tattered shawl she had worn when she first arrived, the one she had used to hide her face. She knelt by the water and held it in her hands for a long time before letting the current take it. It floated away slowly, carried by the gentle stream until it disappeared around the bend. When she returned to the cabin, Elias was waiting by the fence. "Gone for good?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, I don't need to hide anymore." Weeks passed and the valley turned green with spring. The grass grew tall and wildflowers spread across the hills. The ranch was alive again. Clara worked in the garden, and Elias often helped her in the evenings after tending the cattle. The simple rhythm of life returned: work, laughter, and quiet evenings by the fire. Sometimes when travelers passed through, they would stop at the trading post in town and ask about the woman who had once vanished and then come back. Folks would nod toward the Kane Ranch and say, "She's there now, the one who survived everything." Clara didn't mind the talk. She had stopped running from her story. It no longer haunted her. It had shaped her. One bright morning, she rode into town beside Elias. The people greeted her kindly and the shopkeeper smiled when he saw her. "Miss Holt, it's good to see you again," he said warmly. "It's Clara now," she replied with a smile. "Just Clara." They loaded the wagon with supplies, traded a few words with friends, and by the time they rode back, the sun was setting. The light stretched across the plains, golden and soft. When they reached the ranch, Clara looked around. The cabin, the fields, the hills glowing in the distance. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. "It always was. Just needed the right eyes to see it again." That night, as the stars filled the sky, the ranch was quiet. The sound of crickets and the soft crackle of firewood filled the air. Elias sat on the porch, his hat resting beside him, and Clara joined him with 2 cups of coffee. She looked up at the stars. "You ever think about how far we've come?" Elias nodded. "Every day. You came back from a place most folks don't return from, and me, I stopped living like a ghost." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Then maybe we both found our way home." He raised his cup slightly. "To new beginnings." She touched her cup to his. "To home." The night stretched peaceful and still, and for the first time in many years, both of them felt the weight of the past lift away. The ranch that had once been quiet and lonely now carried laughter and light. The storm had passed, the danger had gone, and what remained was something simple and strong, a bond built not by chance, but by courage, kindness, and faith. And as dawn came again over the wide-open land, the rancher and the woman he once thought lost stood side by side, watching the sunrise, no longer haunted by what had been, but ready for whatever the new day would bring. The sun rose behind a low curtain of clouds, painting the plains in gray light. The morning air was still and heavy, and even the birds seemed quiet. Elias Kane stood on the porch of his ranch house, his hand resting on the rifle beside him. He had hardly slept. The tracks in the mud, the distant rider on the ridge, none of it sat right with him. Something was coming, and he could feel it in his bones. Inside, Clara brewed coffee on the small stove. She tried to act calm, but her hands shook slightly as she poured it into 2 tin cups. When she stepped outside, Elias took the cup with a nod. Their eyes met for a moment, and neither needed to say what they were thinking. They both knew the men who had once taken her would not stop until they found her again. "Should we leave?" she asked quietly. Elias shook his head. "No, running won't help. They'll follow your trail wherever it goes. This is open land, but it's my land. I know every ridge and every path. If they come, I'll be ready." Clara looked toward the wide horizon. "You'd risk your life for me again?" He gave a faint smile. "I never stopped the first time." The day moved slowly. Elias repaired the corral fence while keeping watch on the distant hills. Clara stayed close to the house, tending the small garden and feeding the animals, though her mind was far away. Each gust of wind made her look up. Each sound from the distance made her heart race. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered in the west, heavy with thunder. The storm rolled across the plains, slow but certain. Elias brought the horses inside the barn and closed the gate. The wind began to howl, rattling the windows. They were eating supper when the first lightning flash lit up the sky. The thunder that followed shook the floor. Clara jumped, and Elias reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. "It's just the storm," he said softly. "It'll pass." But deep inside, he knew the storm was more than weather. When the rain started, it came hard. The roof drummed, and the wind drove water against the windows. Elias stood by the front door, peering into the darkness. Between flashes of lightning, he saw shadows moving by the edge of the field. At first he thought it might be his imagination, but then a spark lit near the barn, faint but real. "Stay inside," he said sharply. He grabbed his rifle and ran out into the rain. The mud clung to his boots and the wind whipped his coat. When lightning struck again, he saw them clearly. 3 riders near the barn, one holding a torch trying to set the hay pile ablaze. Elias raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. "Leave now," he shouted. His voice was almost lost in the storm. The men turned, startled. One of them shouted something back, but the wind drowned it out. Then one of them raised his pistol and fired. The bullet whistled past Elias's shoulder and buried itself in the wooden wall behind him. He ducked behind a wagon and fired back, aiming low to scare them off. The torch fell into the mud, sputtering out. The horses inside the barn neighed and kicked at the walls. Inside the cabin, Clara stood frozen by the window, her heart pounding. She saw flashes of light and heard the shots echo through the storm. Panic rose in her chest, but so did something else, determination. She grabbed the small rifle that hung above the fireplace and ran outside despite the rain soaking her dress. "Clara, get back inside," Elias shouted when he saw her. She didn't listen. "They're circling around," she cried, pointing toward the back fence. Sure enough, 2 more riders were approaching from the south, their silhouettes just visible between flashes of lightning. Elias cursed under his breath and handed her the spare rifle. "Stay by the porch. Don't fire unless you have to." She nodded, gripping the weapon tightly. The storm howled around them, thunder rolling like cannon fire. Elias moved toward the barn, keeping low, his eyes scanning every shadow. One of the raiders charged forward, his horse splashing through the mud. Elias fired once. The man's hat flew off and he turned his horse sharply, fleeing into the night. The others hesitated. For a moment the wind and rain drowned all sound, and only the flicker of lightning revealed their faces. Cold, angry and desperate, Clara stood on the porch, her breath trembling, water dripping from her hair. She saw one of the riders raise his weapon toward Elias and didn't think twice. She steadied her hands, took aim, and fired. The man shouted in pain and dropped his gun. Elias turned toward her, eyes wide, then nodded once in silent thanks. The remaining men began to retreat, shouting to one another. The storm was too strong, the ground too slick for them to fight longer. One by one they disappeared into the dark hills. When silence finally fell, it was broken only by the rain. Elias stood still for a long moment, breathing hard. Then he walked back to the porch, mud splattered up to his knees. Clara lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. "They're gone," he said quietly. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. "For now." He looked out into the distance where the hills were now swallowed by mist. "They'll be back," he murmured. "But next time, we'll be ready." They spent the rest of the night repairing the barn doors and checking the animals. The horses were frightened but unhurt. The torch had burned out before it caught anything. When they finally went inside, both were soaked and exhausted. Clara sat near the fire, staring at the flames. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I just wanted a normal life again." Elias poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "You still can have it," he said. "You just have to fight for it." She looked up at him. "You don't have to keep risking yourself for me." He smiled faintly. "I told you once and I want to. You've been through enough. It's time someone stood on your side." The warmth of the fire flickered across their faces. Outside, the storm began to fade, the rain softening to a steady rhythm. Clara leaned back in the chair, her eyes half closed. For the first time, she didn't feel like a runaway or a victim. She felt like she belonged somewhere again. Before going to his room, Elias checked the rifle by the door once more. He looked outside through the small window. The land was quiet again, the kind of quiet that came after a hard fight. He knew the danger wasn't over, but he also knew something had changed between them that night. The woman he once thought lost had become the heart of his home, and though more trouble would come, he felt ready for it. As dawn approached, the rain stopped. The land glistened in the first light, fresh and clean. Clara stepped onto the porch, breathing the cool air. Elias joined her, his hat low over his eyes. "They'll try again," she said softly. "Let them," he replied. "This time they'll find we're not so easy to take." They stood side by side, watching the sun break through the clouds, its golden light spilling over the wet earth. The storm had passed, but both knew the hardest test was yet to come. The days on the ranch moved slowly. wrapped in the quiet rhythm of work and recovery. Clara settled into her new life carefully, like a bird unsure if the branch beneath her would hold. At first she spoke little, helping with small chores around the cabin, sweeping the porch, boiling coffee, tending the small garden behind the barn. Elias didn't press her with questions. He knew healing took time, and he'd learned long ago that silence could be its own kind of comfort. Each morning, the sun rose over the ridge, spreading gold light across the open fields. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the air carried the smell of grass and dust. Elias would saddle his horse before breakfast, while Clara fed the chickens and collected water from the stream. They worked side by side, often without many words, but the silence between them felt calm, not heavy. Sometimes she would hum softly while hanging laundry, a faint tune that stirred old memories. It was a song Elias had heard years ago, one she used to sing when her father was still alive. When he heard it now, his chest tightened, not from sorrow but from something gentler, something that felt like hope. By the second week, Clara's color returned. She began smiling again, though faintly, and her steps grew steadier. Yet Elias could tell there were moments when shadows crossed her face, moments when her eyes drifted far away, as if she still saw things no one else could. One evening after supper, a knock came at the door. Elias opened it to find the sheriff standing outside, his coat dusty from travel. "Evening, Kane," he said, tipping his hat. "Just checking in. How's Miss Holt doing?" "She's stronger," Elias replied. "Still quiet, but she's holding on," the sheriff nodded. "Good to hear. Though you both ought to know. Some strangers came through town today, asked a few questions about her. Claimed to be bounty men, but I didn't like the look of them." Clara appeared behind Elias, her face pale. "Did they say who they worked for?" she asked softly. The sheriff shook his head. "Said they were tracking a runaway. Didn't give a name, but from the way they described her, I reckon it's you they meant. I told them there's no one here by that name." Elias felt a chill crawl through his spine. "You think they'll come this way?" "Hard to say," the sheriff replied. "But I'll keep watch in town. Just thought you should know." After the sheriff left, the cabin felt smaller, the shadows longer. Clara sat by the fire staring into the flames. "They found out," she whispered. "They'll come for me again." Elias leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "They won't take you. Not while I'm breathing." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You don't understand who they are. They have men everywhere. They trade people like goods. I ran from them, and they don't forgive that." He reached out, resting a steady hand on the table. "Then they'll have to face me first. You're safe here, Clara. You're home." The word home hung in the air, soft but powerful. She didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if letting herself believe it for the first time. Over the next few days, tension lingered around the ranch. Elias kept his rifle near the door and checked the fence lines twice a day. At night, he sometimes saw distant campfires glowing faintly beyond the hills. Maybe travelers, maybe not. The air felt charged, like the quiet before a storm. Clara tried to act as though nothing had changed, but Elias noticed the way she startled at every sound. Still, she worked hard. She mended clothes, cooked meals, and even began helping in the barn. The horses seemed to calm when she was near. They trusted her gentle voice. Elias found himself watching her more than he should, not out of pity but out of admiration. She was strong, stronger than anyone he'd known. One evening, as the sky turned orange and pink, Clara stood by the corral fence watching the sunset. Elias walked up beside her. Neither spoke for a while. The only sounds were the wind and the soft nickering of horses. She finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder why people survive when others don't?" Elias thought about it, then nodded. "Every day. I lost my brother in a cattle stampede when I was 20. I asked that same question for years. Still don't have the answer." She looked down. "Sometimes I feel like I wasn't meant to make it out. Like I'm borrowing time that isn't mine." He turned to her. "You made it because you fought. Because you mattered. Maybe that's reason enough." Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, she didn't look like the broken woman from the wagon. She looked like the Clara he once knew, alive, brave, and steady, but the peace didn't last. Late that night, when Elias went outside to bring in the horses, he noticed fresh tracks in the mud by the fence. Boot prints. Large ones. He followed them with his lantern until they disappeared near the creek. The water washed away the rest, but his gut told him someone had been watching the house. He went back inside quietly. Clara was asleep in the small room down the hall. He sat by the window, rifle in hand, watching the horizon until dawn. The next morning, he said nothing to her, not wanting to worry her further. But he doubled the locks on the barn door and moved a few supplies closer to the cabin. He was no stranger to danger. The frontier had taught him that peace was never free. That afternoon, while Clara hung laundry behind the house, she stopped suddenly, staring toward the trees. A glint of metal flashed among the branches, sunlight reflecting off something. Before Elias could ask what was wrong, a rider appeared in the distance, moving slowly along the ridge. The figure stopped, looked down at the ranch for a long moment, then turned and rode away. Clara's hands trembled. "That was one of them," she whispered. "I'd know that mark anywhere, the silver buckle on his coat." Elias's jaw tightened. "They're scouting the place, testing how close they can get." "What will you do?" she asked. He looked at her firmly. "Whatever I have to." That night he built a small fire outside and stayed awake again, listening to the sounds of the plains. Coyotes howled in the distance and the wind rustled the dry grass. Clara came to the doorway once, wrapped in her shawl. "You should rest," she said softly. "I will," he lied. "Go back inside." She hesitated, then nodded. But before closing the door, she said, "You don't have to protect me, Elias." He looked at her, his expression steady. "Yes, I do. Not because I have to, because I want to." Her lips trembled slightly and she turned away before he could see her tears. By dawn, the sky was gray again, heavy with clouds. Elias knew the storm wasn't just in the air. It was coming for them, one way or another. He checked his rifle again, tightened the saddle straps on his horse, and took a deep breath. Clara stood on the porch watching him, her hair loose in the wind. She looked fragile, but there was a spark in her eyes now, the same strength that had carried her through the fire and the years of fear. He met her gaze and said quietly, "Whatever happens next, we face it together." She nodded. Together. The word lingered between them like a promise, quiet but unbreakable. The next few days in the small frontier town passed slowly, but nobody stopped talking about Clara Holt. Her return had stirred every heart and every whisper. The women at the well spoke softly of her scars and strength. The men at the saloon lowered their voices when her name came up, wondering who had hurt her and how she had escaped. The story spread like wind through dry grass, each person adding their own guess, each one wondering what truth lay behind those quiet eyes. Elias Kane kept mostly to himself. He rode out to his ranch every morning but found it hard to focus on work. His hands fed the horses, mended fences, and stacked hay, but his mind stayed in town with her. He remembered the girl she had been, full of laughter, quick to help others, never afraid to ride through a storm. Now she was back, changed but still her, and the thought kept pulling at him. On the third day he couldn't stand it anymore. He saddled his bay horse and rode toward town again. The sun was high and hot, the trail dusty, and by the time he reached the trading post, sweat darkened his shirt. The sheriff stood on the porch, pipe in hand, watching him approach. "She's been asking about you," the sheriff said quietly. Elias blinked. "About me?" The sheriff nodded. "Didn't say much. Just asked if you were the same Elias Kane from the North Ranch." "I told her you were." He took a puff from his pipe. "She's stronger today. You can see her if you want, but go easy, Kane. She's been through more than most could bear." Elias tipped his hat and stepped inside. The small back room smelled faintly of soap and medicine. The doctor had left some bandages and a pot of warm broth on the table. Clara sat near the window, her shawl wrapped close, staring at the street outside. When she turned her head, sunlight touched her face, showing faint scars along her cheek, but also a quiet beauty that no hardship could erase. He removed his hat and spoke gently. "Didn't mean to bother you. Just wanted to make sure you're settling in all right." Her lips curved in a weak smile. "You're not bothering me, Elias. It's good to see a familiar face." He sat on the edge of the wooden chair across from her. "You remember me then?" "How could I forget?" she said softly. "You were my father's best hand. You taught me to ride better than any boy in town. I still remember that old chestnut mare you had. What was her name?" "Hazel," he said, smiling faintly. "She's gone now." "Been years," Clara nodded, her gaze dropping to her hands. It feels like everything is gone. The ranch, the trees, the sound of the river behind our house. All gone. He hesitated before asking, "You don't have to tell me anything, but I'd like to understand. What happened after that night?" She took a long breath and closed her eyes. It was dark when they came. I remember the smell of smoke and the horses screaming. My father told me to run, but I froze. I thought it was just a raid like before, that they'd take what they wanted and leave. But they didn't. They burned everything. I was hit on the head before I could get to the barn. When I woke up, I was in a wagon tied and heading south. Elias felt his chest tighten. "South, across the border?" "Yes," she whispered. "They traded me to another group. I don't remember much. I worked in a camp for a long time. They kept me there to cook and sew. I tried to escape once, but they caught me. After that, I waited until the fighting started between their own men. Then I ran again. I followed a river for days. A family took me in, and one of them brought me north. That's how I got here." Elias leaned forward, his eyes full of quiet anger. "You must have been terrified." "I was," she admitted. "But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was thinking no one would remember me." He looked at her, his voice rough with emotion. "I never forgot, Clara. I rode for days after the fire. We found your father's grave, your mother's too. I thought maybe you'd been taken, but no one saw anything. I never stopped hoping you might be alive somewhere." Her eyes softened. "I didn't know anyone still cared." Elias swallowed hard. "Always did." They sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the wall clock filling the room. Outside wagons creaked past and the smell of dust drifted through the open window. Clara spoke again, her voice quiet. "I don't know what I'll do now. I have nowhere to go. I can't stay here forever." "You could come stay at my ranch for a while," Elias said quickly, almost surprising himself. "It's quiet there. You'd have your own room. No one would bother you." She hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." "You wouldn't be," he said. "The place could use another hand. You could help with the garden or the books if you like. Till you figure things out." Her eyes met his, searching for any hint of pity. She found none, only honesty and warmth. "Maybe for a short while," she said finally. He nodded. "I'll ride back tomorrow and get the wagon ready. You can come out the day after." When Elias left the trading post, the sheriff gave him a knowing look but said nothing. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, rare in that dry season. Elias mounted his horse and rode back toward the open valley, feeling something stir in his heart, a quiet mix of hope and worry. The next morning, clouds rolled in from the west. The sky grew gray and thunder rumbled far away. Elias hitched his wagon, checked the horses, and cleaned the spare room. He laid a quilt on the bed and put a vase of dried flowers on the small table by the window. The cabin felt less lonely somehow, though he wasn't sure why. By noon the following day, Clara arrived with the sheriff. She wore a clean dress that one of the town women had given her, and a bonnet that shaded her face. When Elias helped her down from the wagon, her hand was light but cold. "It's good land," the sheriff said, glancing around. "She'll be safe here, Kane." Elias nodded. "I'll see to it." After the sheriff left, Clara stood quietly on the porch looking out over the rolling hills and fenced pastures. The ranch was small but beautiful. A few cattle in the distance, a stream winding near the barn, and tall cottonwoods swaying gently in the wind. "It's peaceful," she said softly. "It's home," Elias replied. That evening, they ate a simple meal together, bread, stew, and coffee. The fire burned warmly in the hearth. For the first time in years, the cabin had a soft voice filling it again. Clara asked about the ranch work, the horses, and the nearby town. Elias answered, sometimes smiling, sometimes growing quiet when memories slipped through. When the meal ended, Clara looked toward the window, where lightning flickered beyond the hills. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Not anymore. After everything that's happened, thunder doesn't scare me." Elias stared into the flames. "Storms pass," he said quietly. "They always do." She smiled faintly at that and thanked him for the meal. Before going to her room, she paused by the door. "It means a lot, Elias, you letting me stay here. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." He nodded. "You're safe now, Clara, that's what matters." When she closed the door, he sat alone for a while, listening to the rain start tapping against the window. The sound was soft at first, then steady, the kind of rain that soaked the earth and brought new life. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about how strange fate could be. He had lost her once to fire and darkness, and now, by some miracle, she had returned with both scars and strength. Yet deep inside, he sensed this wasn't the end of the story. The world had taken too much from her for the past to rest quietly. As the thunder rolled across the plains and the lamps flickered, Elias whispered to himself, "Whatever comes next, I won't let her face it alone." The early sun rose over the dry plains, spilling light across the wooden buildings of the small frontier town. Dust drifted in the air as wagons rolled along the dirt street, wheels squeaking, horses snorting. The trading post stood at the center of it all, its porch lined with barrels, sacks of flour, and tools for sale. Inside, the smell of coffee mixed with leather and old pine. Elias Kane pushed open the swinging door with a slow, steady hand. He was a tall rancher in his mid-30s, his face browned by years of sun and wind. He came every few weeks to trade hides, buy supplies, and catch a bit of news from the town. Folks knew him as a quiet man who minded his own business. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. That morning felt ordinary. He placed a bundle of coyote hides on the counter, greeted Mr. Miller the shopkeeper, and began listing what he needed: lamp oil, salt, nails, and oats for the horses. The clatter of voices filled the room, a few ranch hands joking by the stove, 2 women picking fabric, and a group of travelers from the trail asking for coffee. Then came the sound of wheels outside, heavy, slow, and unfamiliar. Heads turned as a wagon stopped in front of the post. It was covered in a worn canvas sheet, edges torn from long miles. 2 riders flanked it, dusty and armed. One dismounted and spoke softly to the driver, who nodded and jumped down. The townsfolk moved toward the door, curiosity pushing them closer. "What's that about?" someone whispered. Elias didn't look at first. He kept counting coins on the counter, but something in the air changed. A quiet tension that pressed against the walls. He finally turned and stepped to the porch. A man from the wagon called out to the sheriff, who was standing nearby. "We found her near the border," the man said. "She was alone, hurt and scared half to death. Says she's from this territory." Inside the wagon sat a woman wrapped in a blanket. Her face was hidden behind a dark veil, and her hands clutched the fabric tightly. The sheriff came forward, his boots crunching on the boards. "We'll need to see her face," he said gently. "We got to know who she is," the crowd murmured. A few men removed their hats out of respect. Elias watched silently, his heart beating slower but heavier with each second. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. Something deep inside whispered that he'd seen that figure before, long ago in another life that had burned away. The woman hesitated. Her shoulders trembled slightly as she nodded to one of the riders. The man reached forward and lifted the edge of the veil. The sunlight hit her skin, pale but marked by faint scars along her cheek. Her hair, once golden perhaps, was streaked with dust. Her eyes blinked at the light, wide and searching. Then she looked up, directly at Elias. He froze. His hand dropped from his hat. The world around him seemed to fade until there was only her face. Clara. The name slipped out before he could stop it. The crowd turned to stare at him. The woman's lips parted, her eyes filling with tears. For a long, breathless moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the creak of the wagon and the wind brushing against the wooden walls. Elias took a step forward, disbelief twisting his voice. "Clara Holt. It can't be." The sheriff frowned, glancing between them. "You know her, Kane?" Elias nodded slowly, his throat dry. "I knew her. Years ago. She died in the fire." The woman's hand trembled as she lowered the blanket slightly. "No," she whispered. "I didn't die." It felt as if time had broken. 5 years before, Clara Holt's family had been attacked on their homestead by raiders moving through the territory. Elias had ridden with the search party for 3 days, found the farm burned and the people gone. They found graves, but not hers. Everyone assumed the worst. And now here she was, and alive, fragile, yet standing before him. The sheriff motioned for everyone to move back. "Let's give her some room. Miss Holt, you're safe now. You can rest inside." The riders helped her down from the wagon. Elias stepped aside, still staring. When she passed him, she stopped for a heartbeat, her gaze locking on his again. There was recognition there, pain, memory, and something unspoken. Then she looked away and followed the sheriff inside. Elias stood on the porch long after they disappeared through the door. The people around him began to talk all at once. "She's alive?" "Thought she was gone." "Poor girl, what's she been through?" He didn't answer anyone. He felt the world turning slow and strange, like a dream he couldn't wake from. Mr. Miller came to the doorway and spoke softly. "You all right, Elias?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure. Just didn't expect to see a ghost walk into town. That night, the story spread through every corner of the settlement. Some said she'd been captured by outlaws and escaped. Others claimed she'd been taken across the border and traded for supplies. No one knew the truth. Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the fire at his small ranch cabin, staring into the flames. He remembered the old days, how Clara used to visit the ranch with her father, how she laughed when the foal followed her around the yard, how she waved goodbye the night before the raid. He had carried guilt for years, blaming himself for not being there that night. When dawn came, he saddled his horse and rode back into town. The trading post was quiet. The sheriff was there, leaning against the porch rail. He looked tired but calm. "She's inside," the sheriff said, noticing Elias. "Won't say much. Seems scared of her own shadow." Elias hesitated. "Mind if I talk to her?" The sheriff studied him for a moment and then nodded. "Go easy. She's been through hell from the look of it." Elias stepped inside. Clara sat near the stove, wrapped in a clean shawl. Her face looked softer in the morning light, but the sadness was still there. When she saw him, she didn't flinch, just watched quietly as if waiting to see if he was real. He took off his hat. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again." Her voice was faint. "I didn't think I'd ever see anyone I knew." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with years of silence. He finally asked, "Where have you been all this time?" She looked down at her hands. "Far away. Across the border. I was taken after the fire. I thought no one would come." Elias's jaw tightened. "We tried. We looked for you. I swear we did." "I know," she said softly, "but it was too late." The sheriff cleared his throat from the doorway. "We'll get her settled for now. The doc says she needs rest." Elias nodded but lingered, his eyes meeting hers once more. "If you need anything at all, my ranch is open." She gave the faintest smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Elias." As he walked back out into the sunlight, the town around him seemed changed. The dust still blew, the horses still snorted, but everything felt different. A woman he'd buried in his heart was alive, and nothing about the world made sense anymore. He mounted his horse slowly and looked back at the trading post. Behind the window, he saw her silhouette watching him, still and silent. He tipped his hat once, then rode off toward the open plains, his mind full of questions and memories he had long tried to forget.